The government's own lawyers told the Justice Department to fight the lawsuit. They wrote a 25-page memo. They said the filing window had already closed. The Justice Department settled anyway, for $1.776 billion taxpayer dollars. That is not how settlements normally work, and by the end of this video, you will understand exactly why insiders are calling it the biggest legal swerve of the year. The headline name sounds boring. Anti-Weaponization Fund. Bureaucratic wrapper, dynamite payload. Because buried in the paperwork is a deal that wipes out a $10 billion lawsuit, locks the IRS out of past tax returns, and hands a tiny commission the keys to nearly $2 billion in payouts. And the kicker? The IRS lawyers, the government's own attorneys, told the Justice Department to fight it. The Justice Department settled anyway. Stop and picture that for a second. The agency being sued urges its own defenders to dig in. A 25-page internal memo lands on the desks of senior officials. It lays out the weaknesses in the case. It says the filing window had already closed. It recommends a motion to dismiss. And then, days later, the Justice Department walks away from the fight and signs off on a check bigger than the GDP of several countries. And just so you can feel the size of this, $1.776 billion is more than the entire annual budget of dozens of small countries. It dwarfs the operating budget of the Library of Congress. It would fund hundreds of mid-sized hospitals. And it is being paid out, not as a tax cut, not as disaster relief, but as a settlement to people who say they were wrongly investigated. That alone deserves a pause. To understand how we got here, rewind. In 2024, an IRS contractor named Charles Littlejohn, working through the consulting giant Booz Allen Hamilton, leaked the former president's tax returns to the press. He was caught, charged, and sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. That should have closed the book. Instead, it cracked open the most aggressive lawsuit a sitting president has ever filed against his own tax collector. The original demand was staggering. $10 billion from the IRS over that leak. On top of that, 2 more civil claims worth a combined $230 million, one tied to the Russia collusion investigation, one tied to the 2022 search of the Mar-a-Lago estate. 3 lawsuits, 12 different theories of liability, one common message. The federal government, the argument went, had become a weapon. And now it owed for the damage. For months, legal analysts treated those suits as long shots. Tax claims have strict deadlines. Sovereign immunity protects most agencies. And the lead leaker was already serving time. Most courtroom watchers assumed the cases would either get tossed or dragged out for years. What nobody factored in was a quiet change at the top of the Justice Department, and an acting attorney general who used to defend the plaintiff personally. His name is Todd Blanche. Before stepping into the role of acting attorney general, he was Donald Trump's personal defense lawyer through a string of high-profile cases. Now he sits at the head of the very department that was supposed to push back. And as the new filings make clear, pushback is not what happened. Blanche didn't fight the suit. He sat down at a table and negotiated a settlement nobody in the press room saw coming. That brings us to the announcement on May 19, 2026. The Justice Department posted a sterile press release. The IRS released a short statement. The headline product? The Anti-Weaponization Fund, $1.776 billion taxpayer dollars carved out to compensate Americans who say they were wrongly targeted under the prior administration. No criminal review. No congressional appropriation. Just a settlement, signed and sealed, with money pulled from a perpetual federal account. Then came the leak. A copy of the internal IRS memo, 25 pages of careful legal reasoning, found its way to reporters. The contents were devastating. IRS lawyers had concluded the lawsuit was already past its 2-year filing deadline. They flagged serious questions about whether the agency was even liable for a contractor's leak. They urged the Justice Department, in writing, to move to dismiss. None of that made it into the public version of the settlement. Why does that matter? Because the memo turns the official narrative inside out. The story being sold is that the government settled to avoid a costly trial. The memo suggests the government had a strong dismissal argument and chose not to use it. Instead of testing the case in front of a judge, the acting attorney general signed away nearly $2 billion and shut the door on every future IRS investigation tied to those tax years. Read that next part again. Buried in the agreement is language that forever bars the IRS from prosecuting or pursuing any claims connected to the plaintiff and affiliated individuals for tax returns filed before the effective date. Forever. That single word does a lot of heavy lifting. It means audits, charges, and reviews tied to that era are now legally untouchable, regardless of what a future administration might want to investigate. And the fund itself? It is run by a 5-person commission, appointed by the Attorney General, with one critical detail. The President retains the right to remove any member of that commission, without cause. So the people deciding who gets paid out of a $1.8 billion pot can be replaced by the very person at the center of the original lawsuit. Critics call that a conflict so loud it should set off alarms. Then there is the question of who actually gets paid. The settlement does not name recipients. Names and amounts will remain anonymous. But independent analysts have already done the math. The fund could potentially compensate roughly 1,600 individuals charged in connection with the January 6 Capitol attack, including those convicted of violent offenses. A vehicle pitched as protection against weaponized government could, in practice, become a payout pipeline for some of the most controversial defendants of the decade. The reaction online was instant and brutal. Legal commentators called it the most unusual settlement in modern American history. Former federal prosecutors questioned whether the Justice Department even had the authority to set up the fund the way it did. Congressional Democrats demanded hearings. A few Republicans, quietly, asked the same questions. Meanwhile, cable panels lit up with the same disbelief. How did $1.776 billion move so fast, with so little debate? The political shockwaves go beyond money. Every future president, of every party, now has a template. Sue the agency that investigated you. Settle the case through a friendly attorney general. Walk away with immunity for past returns, and a fund you effectively control. The precedent does not expire when this administration ends. It sits on the shelf, ready for the next person who decides the executive branch should defend its own first. There is also a financial wrinkle worth pausing on. The money is not coming from a new appropriation. It is being drawn from what is called the Judgment Fund, a perpetual federal account normally used to pay court orders and routine settlements. That means Congress never voted on this specifically. Lawmakers will only see the bill after the checks have been written. For a body that prides itself on the power of the purse, that is a quiet but enormous transfer of power. And the timeline is no accident. The settlement says the fund stops processing claims on December 15, 2028, just over a month before the next president is inaugurated. In other words, every dollar will be allocated, every recipient will be approved, every check will be cleared before any successor can touch it. By the time a new attorney general takes the oath, the anti-weaponization fund will already be a closed book. So what does this really mean? Strip away the politics, and the story is about 3 quiet shifts in American power. First, the executive branch can now resolve lawsuits against itself by paying allies of the executive. Second, future tax enforcement on a sitting president has just been weakened in a way that is hard to reverse. Third, the line between personal grievance and federal policy has been redrawn in real time, with real money behind it. The institutions involved are not minor players. The IRS, the Justice Department, the Judgment Fund, the Office of the Attorney General, these are load-bearing walls of the federal system. When their internal lawyers write one thing and the political leadership does the opposite, the public usually never finds out. This time, a leak forced the contradiction into daylight. And that contradiction is what makes this story bigger than any single name on the filing. The bombshell is not a tweet, a viral clip, or a fiery speech. It is a settlement document, a leaked memo, and a quiet line that says forever barred. That is the part history will remember. Not the press conference, but the paperwork. So here is my question for the comments. If a future president from the opposing party did the exact same thing, would you still call it accountability, or would you finally call it something else? If this video brought you value, hit like, subscribe, and share it with a friend. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.